In this video, we'll be learning how to scrape data from Google Maps. For our application, we'll be looking at this route from UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, which is right up here, all the way down to San Diego, the University of California at San Diego, UCSD. Now, anyone who lives in SoCal knows that to get between these 2 points, UCLA to UCSD, you probably have to take the 405 freeway, which is kind of the stuff of nightmares around rush hour. So we want to do a little project on how this time in traffic changes based on time of day. For this project, you will need a valid Google account and the Python programming language installed on your computer. I'll personally be using Python version 2.7, but you can go ahead and use Python version 3 with a few modifications. Alright, to get started, we need to request a special kind of code from Google Maps called an API key. An API key basically gives us permission to ask for the specific traffic, time, and distance data that we want from Google Maps. So to get started, scroll down here and just click on Get Started. It'll take us to this page, which has a couple options. Go ahead and click on Routes, and then hit Continue down here. Give it a second here to load. Now give your project a descriptive name. So I'll be calling it Scraping G Maps Data. Hit Next. Give it a second there again. And now it says it wants you to try and enable billing, but we don't need to pay anything. So just go ahead and click Cancel, and then we're actually done with that tab. Now the next thing is navigate to the Enable an API website right here. Go ahead and select the project you just created. So here's Scraping G Maps Data. Click on that guy right there. And now all that's left to do to get our API key is tell it which API, which service in Google Maps we want to try and access. So easily just click on Enable APIs and Services right up here. And for this application, we're just going to want the Distance Matrix API. So go ahead and click Distance Matrix API. This basically gives us, as it says here, travel time and distance for multiple destinations, which is exactly what we want. Go ahead and click on that guy. And then hit Enable. It says enabling API here. Give it a second to enable that API for us. And that's it. Our API is enabled. So now if we want our API key, that actual code we were talking about, go ahead and click on this Google API's header up here to get back to our main page. Click on Credentials, which has this little key icon next to it. And now hit Create Credentials, and we want a API key. So that's it. Here is our API key. We can go ahead and copy it. And that is what we'll be using in our applications. Now, something to note about this key, even though you see mine right here, by the time you watch this video, I will have changed it, which basically means keep this key a secret, because if you give someone this key, they can start making a bunch of requests to Google under your name, and you don't necessarily want that. So go ahead and keep this as secret as possible. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the code we'll be using to scrape this data from Google Maps. This code is pretty simple. It just consists of 2 functions, and the first one we're going to start with is scrape gmaps data. So this function we see takes a couple of arguments here. Let's go through each one just to see what we're dealing with. The first is the API key. We just saw how to extract that one. The next is the origin, which is the latitude longitude of the origin that we want to travel from. So for us, that's the lat long of UCLA. The next is destination, so same thing. This is the lat long for UCSD. The next 2 are about how long and how often we want to do the scraping. Now let's go ahead and dive into this function, which consists of 2 parts. The first part here is constructing something called a request URL, which will send over to Google Maps and get our data back. This request URL consists of 4 easy pieces. The first one is called site, literally just saying, hey, I want to access the Google Maps API site. The next is a specific service we want. We just saw that we want to use the Distance Matrix service. The next is information about the locations that we're traveling to and from. And the last is, of course, the API key that the user provided. Now, taking these 4 pieces, we put them together and construct that thing that we call the request URL. Now, this might seem a little bit confusing, so to demystify it, let's go ahead and see this request URL. So here I've copy-pasted it into a Notepad file. So I just take this guy, copy it, open up a new browser, and paste it in there. Then this is what I get. The main field here we're interested in is duration in traffic, which here tells us that if we were to leave right now, it's going to take us 2 hours and 25 minutes to reach our destination from our origin point. And conveniently, it also gives us this 8692, which is basically just the number of seconds in 2 hours and 25 minutes. And it's a lot easier for us to use that in computations than this string right here. So nice, we see that we got this data back. Then the last thing we have to do in this function is basically, how do I store that data into a spreadsheet so I can use it in my projects? And that is exactly the second part of this function. So we start by opening up that spreadsheet itself, which is called trafficdata.csv. We give it another name as W so we can write to it. The first thing we write to it is the header, so we know what our fields are called. So the only two fields we have are timestamp and how long it took if we were to leave at that timestamp. And the last part of this function is just one big loop that is determined by our duration and frequency, how many times we go through the loop. And each time we go through the loop, we call this helper function called request data from URL, to which we pass that request URL we just saw. Let's go ahead and take a brief look at this helper function before returning over to our main function. So up here, we see our helper function, which of course is called request data from URL. It takes in our request URL, and basically all it does is it uses Python's urllib2 library to request data from that URL. Now, this request may fail for whatever reason, so it continues trying until we get a success. And when we do get a success, we go ahead and take our response, and we call this read function on it to get the data out of it, and we return that over to our main function. So here we are in our main function. Then we use Python's JSON library to convert that, basically this response we got, into a Python dictionary, so we can more easily play around with the data in there without having to get really complicated. So now we see here, this is the piece that actually extracts that data from that response. We see this looks a little bit daunting, but you can think of this basically just as a path. So for example, just to start off, from that data that we get back from Google Maps, I want to go into the rows, I want the first element of that, I want to go in the elements field, etc. So if we just look at what we're doing here, I want to go into the rows, I want to go into the elements, and etc., etc. We want to go into the duration and traffic, we want to get the value. Basically, all that path is just to get to this 8692. So now, we have that 8692 stored in this traffic time. The last step is just to store that into our spreadsheet. So to our spreadsheet W, we write a new row, and that row consists of the current time, followed by that 8692, or whatever that time may be at the current time we decided to depart. And then that's it. We go ahead and wait for the pre-specified time. Let's go ahead and see that in action. So I'm going to run this block here. It says, please enter your API key. How often do I want to scrape the data? I want to scrape it every 5 minutes, and I want to go ahead and scrape that for 1 hour. So off it goes. Obviously, I won't show you this in real time, but let's go ahead and look at the results as they come after an hour. All right, here we are 1 hour later, and our process has finished. So let's go ahead and check our working directory. We see this new file called trafficdata.csv. Let's go ahead and open this guy up. And here we have it. We see these 12 data points, and we see that they're 5 minutes apart about. So we see 345, 350, and so on. And here we see the information we want, the number of seconds it would take to travel from UCLA to UCSD if we left at each of these times. So all the code that was used in this project is freely available on my GitHub. I'll go ahead and link that in the description below. You can go ahead and go through these functions at your own pace. So that's it. Hopefully you learned something in this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe for more videos on how to data science. Until next time.